This is our Khilafah in all its glory, remaining and expanding. It was established in the year 1435 Hijri. Its leader from the tribe of Quraysh is Sheikh Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and its territory is already greater than Britain, 8 times the size of Belgium and 30 times the size of Qatar.
30 months after declaring the caliphate, Daesh's territory is shrinking. Fact: the US-led coalition has killed a number of Daesh's top leaders in Iraq and Syria. Another fact: but is Daesh losing then? That is the question. Welcome to Special Edition, I'm Karim al-Damanhouri. And this episode will be specifically focusing on the surge of Daesh's suicide attacks worldwide in 2016. I met with one of those who felt the devastating impact of Daesh. I also talked with experts about the implications of those attacks and what they tell us about the group and its supporters. But first, let's take a look at Daesh's territory in Iraq and Syria. The US Department of Defense revealed that Daesh has lost nearly half of the territory it once held in Iraq and over a quarter of its territory in Syria. The Mosul and Raqqa operations, as well as the Turkish presence in northern Syria, has further stripped Daesh of more land since October 2016. But despite the crackdown on Daesh's strongholds, the group has managed to step up its deadly attacks in multiple countries, including the US, Saudi Arabia, France, Belgium, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Germany, and many more. Not to mention the more recurring suicide attacks in Iraq and Syria. So is Daesh really losing? The US has been putting news outside and reports that Daesh has been losing a lot of land lately, plus the killings and the targeting of certain leaders like Adnani, and lately with the Minister of Media. What can we infer from that? Is Daesh really losing?
I think it might be premature to say that Daesh is losing. I think what we can say is that they are under significant pressure right now. They're under pressure at home in terms of holding it all together. They're under significant pressure to govern. It's one thing to seize or capture territory. It's another thing entirely to actually govern and make the trains run on time. They have been really struggling lately to remind their followers at home and abroad that they are still as potent as they've ever been. We've also noticed that the quality of their media output has significantly declined. So for all kinds of reasons, I think it's fair to say that they are under pressure right now.
The point is very much to incite also that phenomenon and violence against the Muslim community in the West. What that is supposed to do, much like it instigated a cycle between Shia and Sunni over time in Iraq, is to drive out any space where these communities coexist. The gray zone, right? They've taken what was very successful in turning the insurgency in Iraq into a civil war. They've just globalized that. So what you see with suicide attacks in the West as they are losing territory in their homelands are attacks that will drive a wedge between Muslims and the countries that are not Muslim majority. ISIS explains very clearly in Dabiq that over time, what they see as a result of this strategy is that Muslims have no choice but to either apostatize and leave everything about Islam behind, or depart from their societies and join Islamic State, leaving no other option.
My sense is that you'll start to see more of these attacks outside of the initial kind of geographical concentrations as they kind of get beat back and disbanded in terms of where the territories that they hold are focused. You're going to start to see more of that spread out, I think, as well. So in that case, you can clearly attribute it a little bit more directly to loss of physical territory where it starts to spread a bit more. But it'll be more diffuse, I think.
You know, the Mosul operation on the one hand does indicate that by taking land and taking territory from the central HQ, I guess, or the homeland and the capitals of, so-called Islamic State, in that sense, yes, they're losing ground, they're losing territory. That in itself is not sufficient, for a rollback of this organization. It's not a front that can be fought in a military capacity. It's a multiple level front, and I think that unfortunately, people are not being exposed to the nature of this organization as it is.
In July and August of 2016, Daesh circulated videos of suicide attackers pledging their allegiance before carrying out attacks in France, Germany, and Russia. Daesh has also claimed other attacks in Canada, Denmark, Turkey, and the US over the past year. But what is it that prompts a European or an American citizen to kill civilians and die in the process? What can we infer from the latest streak of suicide attacks?
There's a different strategic rationale between the kinds of suicide attacks that take place locally in Daesh-controlled territory versus the kinds of suicide bombings that they call for increasingly in foreign countries. The main rationale is that they are trying to project an image of their strength both at home and abroad, but they have been calling time and time again for their followers to take up arms against the disbelievers. And it's a strategy they have had, I think, limited success with so far, but we see increasingly now a greater frequency in terms of just how often they're putting out that call. Only in the last few days, they've actually shifted their view of calling for these lone wolf attacks, which is a sort of a misleading term, but they're calling on their followers to get inspired, to mobilize, and to go out there and make themselves known. And it really is all about just continuing and perpetuating the psychological warfare that we're here, we're still powerful, and we still have the ability to affect you and control how you see us.
What would prompt a French citizen or a Russian citizen or a US citizen to get involved in such an attack?
There's many, many potential causal features and causal factors that would influence that. I think some of the things that we tend to know is this kind of sense of importance, of purpose that is derived from this, the ultimate sort of sacrifice you can make, the ultimate sort of gift. But it also, I think, is something that people can do when they don't necessarily feel like a citizen, when they feel this kind of conflict between multiple conflicting identities. And here's one of the things that we know about Daesh's narrative that really kind of speaks directly to that. Like, we understand that you can't be both of these things, you can be this, and here's the way to fulfill that objective, to achieve that sort of ultimate contribution, that ultimate sort of sacrifice for this greater cause, be part of something historic, cosmically important. And so if people are really kind of looking for that, this provides a particular way for that to be manifest.
I think for most people, they would rush to judgment on this and say, well, it is something about Islam. It is something about religious ideology that pushes people into this kind of act. I understand why people rush to that judgment, but it's an error to believe so. If religion alone caused people to act in this way, I think we would see far more suicide bombings than we ever could.
When you hear about people trying to come up with like a common profile for suicide bombers or suicide attackers, what do you think of that?
There is no profile. I mean, suicide bombings tend to be one of the most extreme forms of political protest. If anything, I think a profile, if we found one, would help us simplify what is in reality an enormously complex process. The reality, however, is that there is no profile. I don't see that as a failure of academic research. I actually see it as the successful outcome of the research. It is the conclusion of the research. Suicide bombers, whether they are men, women, adolescents, or children, do have one thing in common. They come to believe, through one way or another, that they will achieve more in death than they will ever achieve in life. But how individuals come to that belief, it happens in multiple different ways and through multiple different avenues. But there certainly is no clear profile.
The attacks that the US and Europe have seen are much more common in Iraq and Syria. Daesh has claimed over 1,100 suicide attacks in Iraq and Syria in 2016, the deadliest of which killed more than 300 civilians in the Qarada district in Baghdad on July 3rd. Muhammad Jassim, an Iraqi-American student at Georgia State University, was at the site of the attack minutes before the explosion.
I was in the building 10 minutes before it went up in flames. I have a lot of family and friends who live in Karada, so during Eid we usually go there because it's a very, it's a business area, but it's also residential, which makes it beautiful because you have people of all walks and backgrounds always over there. So we were sitting in my cousin's cafe on the second floor of the Hadi Center building. And me and my friends were just basically waiting for Fajr because it was Ramadan and we were preparing for fasting. And we stayed at the bottom of the building just talking. This is when we saw my relative and his 2 kids walk in the building. They were the owners of the building. And we just said hi, just messed around with them, joked around. We're like, oh, it's 12. What are you doing outside of your house? Your wife is going to kill you. And he was just laughing and talking to us. And as soon as we left, you just hear, and surprisingly, it wasn't as loud as I had expected it. I've heard other bombings before, but this was just like, and it was like, in a way, it was a lot quieter, and we didn't know what was going on. And it was at the exact same time that the Italy and Germany game, the Euro Cup game, was going on. So everyone thought it was part of the fireworks or people were celebrating. And we just like turned back around and look, and the fire's blazing. And we were just like shocked because we were all in there 10 minutes ago. But we were yelling to people inside, and we were telling them we're on our way to help you. Just try your best to just stay alive and try to go somewhere where you can see fresh air. And we could hear them screaming back, but we couldn't do anything at that point. I didn't know who to cry for, me and my family, or the families of those who had lost. I mean, it was over 500-600 people that were killed, over 400 people, definitely. And then those who were injured, many of them died a few days later. So it was full of emotions, and it didn't really hit me till 3 days later when we were burying Ruqayya, the daughter that we found. It didn't hit me till then that, this is what happened. And we were just carrying her coffin and crying because, she was a young girl. She was 6 or 7 years old, and it was a disaster. Just the mention of Baghdad brings to people the idea of bombings. They don't think of Baghdad as more than a place that gets bombed all the time. So with them, you have to specify when, and it just like, I tell many people, and they're like, yeah, it happens there all the time. They're used to it. And it's sad to hear that. It really is. They're used to it. So it's as if like their killing doesn't really matter as much because it happens so often. But they tend to forget the families and the stories of these people.
Is there anything else you'd want to say with regards to suicide attacks hurting Baghdad and beyond?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of bombings in Baghdad, and I just wish people paid more attention to them, because the more you give them coverage, we might hope maybe someone can do something about them, try to reduce it. And the coverage also makes the pain of the families a little less, to know that someone is hearing their story, that they're just not another number. My cousin, his name is Sayyid Hassan. Sayyid Hassan actually took his kids, Hadi and Ruqayya, his oldest son and his middle daughter, to get ice cream and clothes for Eid, because they were celebrating Eid in a few days, and they wanted to get ice cream and just see their dad's shop basically, or their mall. And it's sad because they were there to go have fun and enjoy, and then they ended up being carried out in coffins.
Over time, there's the repetition of the idea that death in the Middle East, death in the Islamic world, is something that happens. It's normal. It's expected. It's to some extent excused and or acceptable. So the deaths of how many children in Syria become a blip on the radar, but one war correspondent or one soldier from the US is days of coverage, right? Because that's not supposed to happen to us, right? We expect it to happen to them.
Western audiences have become relatively immune to suicide bombings in the Middle East, and Daesh is acutely aware of this. I mean, they are acutely aware of the kind of reactions we've had to the events in Paris and Brussels and San Bernardino, Orlando especially, and so there is a concerted effort to push their issues and their agenda onto what they see as an otherwise indifferent audience, and that is us.
So there is a differential level of coverage. We may not have as much exposure to it, which then kind of, I think, obfuscates a little bit the actual threat that Daesh poses. It's very, significant in theaters and local regions in which they're kind of more powerful in terms of their operational capacity. And that differs from what it would be in Europe or the US, but certainly those attacks are going to generate significantly more coverage if they are achieved, and even with significantly lower casualty rates, because it's just kind of going to get a lot more of that sort of focus.
Dealing with the reception of Steven Sotloff's execution versus give me any atrocity on any given Karada, and so on and so forth, anywhere, is immense. It's immensely disproportional, That's an issue, I think, of media literacy, I guess, that I wish I could solve. I'm just saying, of course there's a difference in coverage because you always look out for your own people. That's just the nature of a self-interested state, and that's pragmatic to an extent. It's also dishonest to say there's not a problem with whose lives are presented to matter more.
One of the features of ISIS's propaganda is that they pay attention to what we say about them. They pay attention to the way in which we look at what they do, and so they are acutely aware of the need to occasionally burst those bubbles and to launch back onto the scene with something new, something different, something with which to shock us, whether it's using young children or whether it's executing prisoners in an even more malevolent or creative way, just to remind us of who they are and that they still have the power to control our attention spans. I think in the long run this movement will continue to struggle, and it will eventually diminish in capacity and size and influence. I think it's important to see suicide attacks not as a phenomenon per se, but simply as one of a number of tactics this movement has engaged in and promoted, because it is the epitome of asymmetric warfare and psychological warfare, which for me is one of the defining features of what terrorism is all about. You don't have to be successful. You don't have to be able to kill the kinds of large numbers we've seen, as for example in the Bataclan attack in Paris, but to be able to try to inspire followers to go out there and strike fear in the hearts of the enemy. This is what they aspire to. And it might seem like an offensive thing to say, given that we have faced terrorist attacks here, but they have been, by and large, relatively unsuccessful. There's going to come a point where even ISIS followers in the West are going to realize that no matter how many times the movement puts out these calls to do things, they really are going to struggle to mobilize their followers to actually going out and giving up their lives in the name of some cause that even the most committed of ISIS supporters barely understand.
Despite the media's coverage, the fact remains that Daesh is killing Muslims, Christians, Jews, and human beings from all different backgrounds. With an average of more than 2 people executed per day in Daesh's territory since January 2015, and over 1,000 killed in suicide attacks outside Iraq and Syria, we're left to wonder if the group's loss of territory and leaders could ever really put an end to its attacks.